Good afternoon, everybody. Richard here, and I'm coming to you with another study from the Bible. And I hope that today our time will be very profitable. In fact, today's study is both a follow-up and a wrap-up of the last few weeks where we have been studying about the individual disciple and his or her relationship with a local church. We raised the question a few weeks ago about daily discipleship and what is involved in daily discipleship, because being a Christian is more than just association with a local church. A local church's relationship with a local church is a part of that, but it's more than that. And so then we raised the question on the heels of daily discipleship: do we even need a local church as disciples of the Lord? And of course the answer to that is yes, because it's part of God's plan that the solitary, whether physical or spiritual, that they be set in families. And then we looked at, well, if it's the case that a disciple is to have a relationship with a local church, what are the responsibilities that that local church has to that disciple? And we looked primarily at Ephesians chapter 4, and noticed a number of responsibilities that a local church has to its members, to the disciples that comprise that local church. So what I want to do as a follow-up to that previous study on what a local church owes its members is to do a study of what each individual disciple owes the local church of which they are a part. Again, it's an answer, a balancing answer to the previous question about what a local church owes its members, and it serves as a wrap-up. We talked about daily discipleship. Do we need a local church? What a local church's responsibilities are to its members. And now today we're going to talk about what an individual disciple's responsibilities are to the local church. And I guess this is probably the most important place to begin. And that is just to make the point that a local disciple has a responsibility to identify, to join, if I can use the biblical term, a local church. A lot of times, especially as Americans, I think this affects us more than we like to admit. I have my rights, and I can do this, and I can do that. Well, there are rights and privileges that you have as a disciple. But along with those rights and privileges come responsibilities. Again, God never intended for individual disciples just to go about life as loners. He intends for us, as illustrated in the life of the Apostle Paul, to join ourselves to a local church. Now, what often happens is that people will visit worship with a local congregation over a period of time and get all the benefits, but not necessarily officially identify with that local church. And I want to ask you two questions in regard to that. In fact, let me ask you three. Number one, do you do that in other areas of life? Does somebody just walk into your workplace and say, "Oh, well, I'm a worker here. I'm a member of this company"? No. They have to express the desire to be a worker there, and the company has the responsibility to vet them and hire them. Can anybody just walk through the door and sit at the table of your house with your family without you knowing something about who they are and having some relationship? Do you just let strangers walk in and out of your house? You see, we don't do that in other relationships that are secular in nature, and yet if we're not careful, we can just say, well, all I need to do is just to worship. I really don't have to identify. Here's the second point. Since we don't do that in secular society, why do we think we can do that in spiritual society? Number two, have you thought about the fact that you are shortchanging yourself when you do that? Taking the time to officially identify with the congregation and say, I want to be a part of this group and to work and worship with this congregation of God's people. And I am going to provide myself as an official member here. That's good for you. Because then it is clear in your mind, I'm a member here, I have privileges here, but I also have responsibilities here, which leads to the third point, and that is you're shortchanging other Christians from your relationship not being part of a local church. Saul attempted to join himself to the disciples at Jerusalem. They said, wait a minute, we have some questions. Rightfully so in light of his background. Barnabas stepped up and said, I know him, he's changed, here's what's gone on with him. And then he was numbered with them at Jerusalem. What do I, as an individual disciple, owe the local church of which I am a part? Number one, the responsibility and privilege to officially identify with that local church so that there are no questions, both in your mind as well as in the mind of other people in that congregation, that you officially desire to be a part of that local church. But what are some other things? Well, we're going to go back to Ephesians chapter 4, which is the passage we studied a few weeks ago, and talking about a local church's responsibility to the individual members. Again, it's a two-way street. Anytime there's a one-way street in a relationship, something is amiss, something's wrong, something's out of balance, and that's usually because there's a hidden agenda. Somebody wants all the benefits and blessings without the responsibilities and work that goes into having a mutually beneficial relationship. The same thing is true with the local church and the individual disciple. Now, I'm going to just briefly review some things that we looked at in Ephesians chapter 4, just to establish this point. The goal of a local church is to encourage people to walk in holiness, to encourage people to be spiritually mature, to encourage people to be spiritually stable, to encourage people to speak the truth in love and cause the growth of the body. Every one of those points is made in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 16. In fact, if you want the specific verses, I would encourage you to look at verse 1, verses 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. There are the goals of what a local church is to provide. Now, my question is, if a local church is providing that to you, providing that opportunity to you, are you taking up the mantle and doing your part to walk in a holy way of life, to be spiritually mature, to be spiritually stable, to speak the truth in love, and to cause the growth of the body? Just as a local church has the responsibility to provide those things to you, you have the privilege and the responsibility to make the commitment to participate in that as part of a local church. Another thing we looked at was the fact that a local church is to provide an environment where people can grow, where there's gentleness, there's patience, there's lowliness, so that people can develop. Because people are at different places. The Bible does not require us to be clones of one another, but it does require us to be united. And in order to be united, there has to be an atmosphere of growth and patience and work together. If a local church provides that, are you willing to make your commitment so that when maybe somebody says something that might strike you a wrong way, or does something that you think that they ought not to have done, or maybe they fail to do something that you think they should have done, are you willing to step back in patience and in gentleness, in humility, and say, okay, that's a brother or sister. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I want there to be an atmosphere for growth in this local family of which I'm a part. Are you willing to make that commitment as a disciple of the Lord and as part of a local body? But then verse 3 talks about endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Unity is an important thing, and a key contributor to unity is peace. He goes on in verses 4, 5, and 6 to lay out the platform for unity that God wants, or that God has provided. So my question to you is, are you doing your part to keep the unity of the Spirit and do so in the bond of peace? Are you standing up for the things such as one body, one Spirit, your calling, one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father? Are those the things that you stand for? If a local church is going to stand on those principles, on those foundational, fundamental features of being a child of God, then my question to you is, are you contributing your part to that unity? Not clonality, unity. And are you doing that in peace? Peace does not mean compromise. The book of James teaches that the wisdom from above, James chapter 3, is first pure, then peaceable. Sometimes people like to reverse that. Sometimes people want to say, well, let's make peace first and we'll worry about purity later. That's not what James says. James says, first pure, then peaceable. Are you contributing your part to the peace and harmony, to the unity of the Spirit as outlined in Ephesians 4, verses 3, 4, 5, and 6? Think about that. And then we noted that Christ gave gifts to men, that his ascension accomplished a number of things. And one of those things it accomplished was to set some local organization for function of a local church. Verse 11, the apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Are you submitting to the teaching of the apostles? What about the instruction of the prophets where we have that instruction recorded? You see, that's source material. Are you taking the source material of the apostles and prophets, and under the guidance, the leadership of pastors? Sometimes people will want to call a preacher a pastor. That's not a biblical concept. In fact, that point is made right there in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 11. Evangelists, pastors, and teachers. They're not the same role. An evangelist has the responsibility to proclaim the word. Are you upholding the arms and the hearts and the mouths of good men who are preaching the truth of the gospel? Are you providing that part in your local church? Sometimes when people have problems, they run to the elders. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a wrong thing. Don't miss my point. Don't make another point that I'm not trying to make. But sometimes the same people that would do that are people who refuse to identify with a local church. Friend, how can you have a full relationship of provision and accountability with a local eldership when you have not chosen to identify with that local church and to be recognized as working under the oversight of that eldership? Interesting. And the teaching process. Do you just want to be taught and want to glean all the information? Well, then what about the responsibility to teach, participating in teaching, whether it be private or public? You see, the local church provides, but the accomplishment of that work is dependent on the response and the commitment of the local members in doing that work. We all want to be spiritually mature and spiritually stable. We want to be transformed to the image of God's Son, or conformed to the image of his Son. But are we contributing our part to developing our own spiritual maturity and our own spiritual stability? Or are we sitting back and saying, well, that's the responsibility of the evangelist and of the pastors and of the teachers to do that for me, and I just take all that in and I don't really have a responsibility in that? Really? What verse do you base that on, my friend? You see, in a local church, the church provides the opportunity for you to grow, and then you provide to yourself the actual growth. It is a two-way relationship. It is a two-way street. Speaking the truth in love, verse 15 of Ephesians chapter 4. Notice that verse requires three things. It requires speaking. It requires speaking the proper information, the truth, and it requires speaking the proper information in the proper disposition in love. Speaking the truth in love. So when it is your turn to speak the truth, are you speaking or remaining silent? Are you speaking the truth Or are you trying to maybe hedge the truth a little bit? Are you speaking the truth in love? Or are you speaking the truth from some lesser, more sinister motivation? Speak the truth in love. And then finally, verse 16, where Paul makes the point that every person has a responsibility and an opportunity to supply their part. And that does not matter whether you are a man or a woman. You have a responsibility to play, a part to play. You have the privilege of making a difference in somebody else's life. It doesn't matter whether you're younger in the faith or older in the faith, whether you're younger in calendar years or older in calendar years. You have a part in the development and growth of a local body of disciples. Are you supplying that part? Maybe as a young person, you have the vim and the vigor of youth, and you can do all kinds of work. Or as an older person, you might not be as spry as you once were, but you have wisdom and experience that can provide a lot of benefit to a lot of people. Or are you just sitting back and just letting somebody else do that work? It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, Timothy, you're going to have some who are not as rich among you, and then you're going to have some who are very rich. Here's how you act toward one group and the other. And you do that without partiality. If you are rich in this world's goods, congratulations, God has blessed you. Are you using those goods for His service and for the benefit of other disciples in particular? Maybe you're not as well blessed as some other people in terms of material wealth. There are other ways to be rich. Are you being rich as a disciple in the ways that you can? It doesn't matter what color your skin is. There's the song that children sing sometimes, red, yellow, black, or white. All are precious in His sight. It does not matter what the color of your skin is in being a disciple of the Lord, and it shouldn't matter in being a disciple of a local church. If you are a child of God and you're committed to His Word and His work in His way, and you wanting to join yourself to a group of disciples, then you make that commitment. And regardless of someone else's skin color, ethnicity, or culture, you're fellow disciples, and you work and worship together. And finally, let me say this. We really haven't touched on this as a topic, although it certainly fits into this discussion of the relationship between a local church and the individual disciple. And that is to consider all of the one another instructions in the New Testament. There are several instructions that encourage us to greet one another, to bear with one another, to provoke one another, etc., etc. Just a bunch of those instructions. You might be able to do some of them on an individual disciple to individual disciple relationship. But I am becoming more and more convinced as the longer that I live and study that a lot of those one another instructions have their greatest fulfillment and impact in a local church relationship. Are you wanting to receive from everybody else and not give anything back? Or are you willing to work and to walk on the two-way street of the one another instructions, helping disciples and being helped by disciples? I hope this has helped to put in perspective some principles, some teaching of Scripture that are involved in daily discipleship and the relationship of the daily disciple to a local church. The foundational relationship is one's relationship with God, and that is a day-by-day commitment to live as Jesus Christ would have one to live. That's the foundation of it all. That's the root relationship, if you will. But as roots grow and develop, they begin to produce fruit. One of the fruits is becoming part of a local church, identifying with a group of disciples who seek to please God and be loyal to Him, them contributing their part to you and you contributing your part to them. God hath set the solitary in families. I appreciate your listening to this just brief series on the relationship of the disciple in the local church. I hope I've approached it in a way that, number one, is biblical and is scripturally sound, but number two, that is practical and thought-provoking. We have significant opportunities as daily disciples. We have significant opportunities as part of a local church. And I hope that I've helped to that end. I'm going to ask you, if you'd like to subscribe to the channel. You can reach down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen where the Psalm 19 is in blue, and you can click that and it will automatically subscribe you to the channel. That way you will get notifications as new material appears. You may not want to do that, and you don't have to. But you listen to these Bible studies together and you get some benefit out of them. And as you're going along and listening, you think, so-and-so might benefit from that. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to at least share the video with somebody that you know that might benefit from studying the Bible in the way that we're trying to do here. Very scriptural-based studies, but trying to make them very practical. The Bible is not just supposed to be taught and heard. It is supposed to be lived. And that's what this YouTube channel is about. One disciple using technology to teach the Bible. Thanks for tuning in this afternoon. I appreciate your time and your attention. And if the Lord is willing, we shall have more studies in the future. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.